let's take some questions. So if you have a question, raise your hand. I can't see over there. Yes.
I have a question. We have not mentioned racism in America. If the Voting Rights Act gets further shred, what can we, policy vis-a-vis California, do and lead the nation?
I think Mike takes that one.
Racism, give it to Mike. Thank you. There's two different questions there, and they're both enormous. The first was dealing with racism and the question of race, and I think this is probably the issue, for very good reason, that people are the most trepidatious and anxious about. The underpinnings of race and the way we talk to each other and the way we don't talk to each other are changing, and I think we will look back at 2016 as a very pivotal year. And I'm going to say some things that I guess are probably going to be very controversial, but that's kind of what I do, and I'm very comfortable doing that. I'm happy to talk with you guys more about this afterwards. We are using a term in my profession, political consulting, that we never used 4 years ago: white voter. Okay? It used to be that pretty much everybody was a white voter, right? The whole country was a white voter. But what is happening is that whites, as a share of the electorate, are shrinking. And as whites shrink as a share of the electorate, you're starting to see whites, particularly those that work in blue-collar jobs, non-college educated jobs, begin to behave like an aggrieved racial minority. And we are at a time in American history where, with the decline of white voters and the ascent of Latinos specifically, but API voters to a smaller extent, especially in blue states, African American voters, the tensions between us as Americans are going to become more and more exacerbated. And social media, rather than bringing us together, is creating these bubbles where we just echo our own thoughts, our own beliefs, and associate with ourselves and our own opinions. And that is the danger of racism, because, and here's the controversial part, racism is not the province of any political party. It is the province of mankind. And if you believe, like a lot of people do, unfortunately, at this moment, that the majority of Republicans are racists, you're not paying attention. You're not paying attention, okay? Because people who live in red states wake up in the middle of the night worried about what their fears are, and they are very real. And both sides need to stop using the rhetoric that they use and find some mutual understanding. The question is, what coursework should we take? You shouldn't take a coursework. You don't need a college education, sorry, Rafe. You need to go to red country. Go take a card trip across your nation and use that firsthand experience to see what your fellow Americans are experiencing day in and day out, and use that experiential learning process to figure out what you can do for your country.
If I could just also add something to that about the Voting Rights Act. One of the untold stories of this election that it'll take months for more researchers to find out is whether the removal of key protections in the Voting Rights Act had an impact in some of the states like Wisconsin and others where restrictions were put in that caused a lot of people not to be able to vote. And those restrictions may have disenfranchised more people than the margin of difference between the two candidates.
Let me speak to that very briefly, because this really angers me. Look, as a political professional, I'm not going to suggest that voter suppression efforts don't happen. They do. I'm also not going to suggest that voter fraud doesn't happen. It does. But it's not happening. Neither of these happen to near the extent that we suggest they do. The bigger problem is not the Voting Rights Act that may have kept the margins in Wisconsin enough to throw the election. The bigger issue is only 46% of the people who registered to vote in this country showed up to vote. That's the problem. Okay? So let's quit using these tactics to say, oh, you're trying to suppress African American votes in North Carolina. And oh, you're trying to get undocumented immigrants to stuff the ballot box in LA County. Do those happen? Yes, they happen. Are they marginal? They're absolutely marginal. Should they be rooted out? Both of them? Yes. But the bigger issue is half of us in this country don't vote. That's the problem, and that's where we need to focus on it.
Mm-hmm. Let's see, we have a question over here. Thank you. We can't hear you very well.
This question.
Mike actually answered my initial question, so my other question would be in regards to Kara's mention of California doubling down on climate change and renewable energy. What programs or steps has California taken to basically promote companies like Tesla to stay in California and further further advance renewable energy instead of going to other states like Tesla's Gigafactory moving to Nevada instead of staying in here in California where they actually started?
California is taking strong action on climate change for all kinds of reasons, and some of them have to do with what California has at risk from climate change. We have this historic drought that climate scientists tell us is made worse because of climate change. We have historic wildfires. We have a coastline that's tremendously at risk from sea level rise and all kinds of infrastructure along that coastline. But I think the single most important reason California is taking strong action on climate change is because it believes, and California's leaders believe, correctly in my view, that California's economy actually benefits if we become a clean tech leader. And we've seen that already because we've seen California attract more venture capital funding and clean tech manufacturing facilities than other states. And we see California taking advantage of that and looking to a clean tech future and to being an exporter of this technology to the rest of the world. By the way, we also see China these days making many of these same calculations. So California has done a bunch of things. Obviously, it takes advantage of its natural home, sort of the Silicon Valley VC tech center, and it's turned a lot of the attention of those VC folks toward clean tech ventures. We're doing a little bit of that here in Los Angeles as well with Silicon Beach. It uses tax credits. It uses all kinds of forms of sort of incentive-based regulation paired with more traditional regulation to try and shift manufacturers away from use of fossil fuels and toward more green tech and clean tech. So we have a cap and trade program in California. We have direct command and control regulation. We have a regulation that requires Californians to get now 50% of our energy sources from renewable sources by 2030. It's really a suite of policies. It's really sort of everything in the kitchen sink that California thinks is likely to begin to bend the curve of emissions down. One of the remarkable things about California's story in recent years is that it has, if you look at the trend in our emissions over the last sort of 3 or 4 years, and also the trend in our California GDP over that same time, we've now decoupled climate emissions from a growing economy. Our economy has continued to grow, and our emissions are now shrinking. And that's the story that California is trying to sort of tell on the national and international stage. One of the tragedies, I think, that's likely to happen under a Trump administration is California is less likely to attract partners in its climate policies now from other states than it would have been under a President Clinton administration. I think there's no doubt we've lost a few years. Whether we've lost more than a few years remains to be seen.
We will now move to what we call in our debates the lightning round. What we do, well, actually, we're just making this up right now, but basically, we want to get a few more questions in, so we're going to ask for short questions and then 30-second answers from a panelist. That's what we actually do in our debates, and it turns out that candidates for the U.S. Senate can come up with a 30-second answer. Sometimes they only do 25 and then run out of things to say. So who's next? Diana?
So here's my quick question. We're talking about states' rights here, right? That's the macro strategy. So what I want to hear from the panelists is, this has been the Republican strategy for the last 2 administrations. So what do Democrats borrow that they did right? And what do they not do to further plunge us into sort of basically paralysis?
Anna, you want to do 30 seconds on that one?
Well, speaking as a Democrat myself, I think the Democratic Party needs to listen to people across the country and to do a better job understanding the economic fears that many people are facing, and then develop strategies that speak to those concerns that Americans have.
That was good. That was
Like 15 seconds.
That was like 15 seconds.
Short speeches win elections.
Yes.
So you guys had previously talked about the possible amending of the Affordable Care Act, And I was wondering, does this mean that there's going to be a shift in the Republican agenda? And if so, what does this mean for the ever-evolving Republican Party? Thank you.
Mike, you want to do 30 seconds?
30 seconds on that. No, look, I don't think that the Republican base and Republican leaders are going to like or support the Affordable Care Act. I think Trump will be able to muscle it through with enough support. The Republican Party faces a very significant challenge, as does the Democratic Party, because it's two pillars. Both of them have two pillars that are completely economically at odds with one another. The Republican Party is made up largely of, or used to be, anti-tax, free trade, smaller, more efficient government groups. They have been taken over by populism, nationalism, and isolationists, which I think there's also a strain of white nationalism that's there, ethnic, like I said, an aggrieved racial minority. Those are two untenable positions economically, and that fight will bear out over the next 10 years. It's the exact opposite challenge that the Democrats face with wealthy white coastal elites, especially here in California, and lower middle class people of color whose economic interests are not one and the same. They are not. And those coalitions work together in a very tenuous way for one simple reason. They don't like each other. What is keeping the Democratic base together is they don't like Republicans, and they certainly don't like Donald Trump. It's the same thing with Republicans. They will stomach each other in their own coalition long enough to beat the other side. Normally what you see, and sorry about my time here, normally what you've seen historically in the American experience is people on the lower economic rung start to coalesce and create a middle. You are not seeing that because of the radical demographic transformation that is happening in this country. And poor people, whether you're poor white people, don't like poor people of color, and poor people of color don't like poor white people. That's what's happening in our country.
Walter, I know I can count on you for a short question.
Well, actually, you can't count on me for a short question, but I have a short comment. Just on the Affordable Care Act, I think the most likely thing that's going to happen is that Republicans will repeal it quickly. Replacing it will be another story. Replacing it could be a 2-year fight. A lot of people are talking about repeal in January or February with a replacement date of, say, January 1, 2018 or 2019, giving the Congress 2 years to figure out what to do, because you can't just go from here to there overnight. And I think that's when the rubber will hit the road. And that's when the rhetoric will hit reality, and it'll be very, very difficult to preserve what they want in Obamacare without keeping what they don't want. And that's where it's going to be a very, very difficult political fight.
Thank you, Walter. We'll take that as a comment. Let's take a question here.
I'd like to see this one be in 30 seconds. I'd like to talk about the Electoral College and the proposed, our senator has put forth reform or repeal of the Electoral College and how that will affect California.
I can do that really quick, unless you want it.
It's not going to happen. Whatever happens, you need to get 3/4 of the state legislatures, and why on earth would Rhode Island give up its 3 ridiculous votes it doesn't deserve? Every state that gets 3 electoral votes is playing with House money. The only way it can happen is the silliest way, which I highly recommend you don't participate in, which is get one state at a time to agree to allocate their electoral votes by the popular vote. That would have catastrophic partisan and ideological implications that you may not realize, especially for California, for example. So I think it's a wonderful idea to dream of having that college not in our university bank, but I think there's just so many other things going on in the world. By the way, if your favorite candidate had won the electoral vote and had lost the popular vote, people would be saying this is the greatest system that ever lived. Madison knew what he was doing. This is really whose ox gets gored, basically. So I would like to take, we will take one more question who's been waiting patiently, and this will be another lightning round, and then we will go and there's a buffet and bring your food back, and then once we have eaten and settled in, we'll hear the comments of the Secretary of State. Go ahead, last question.
My question is quick to Mike or Kayla. How do we get people out of the bubble? So I'm a big liberal, but we have a prominent conservative club here, and every time they try to do something, we shut them out, and I think that's a good like little scope of the national discussion that we shut down Trump supporters instead of engaging with them. So how do we get people out of their bubble, both for conservatives and for liberals?
Well, I think especially here on campus, Trinidad, we were just talking about it not too long ago, is, you know, giving people the ability to have their space, right? You're big liberal, a big conservative, ultra-conservative person should have the same space. So just creating, I love what Trinidad said, creating kind of a panel for students, more similar to this, you know, where you have conservative ideology, liberal ideology coming together, talking about the issues, engaging in an open dialogue. We've had struggles with this, you know, as a campus, but I think we really owe it to ourselves as people to listen and hear the opposition, whatever that may be, so that you're a stronger person, one, and two, so that you're providing that space that's allotted to you. So having a panel like this would be really beneficial.
I would say the fact that you say that we struggle with this may be one of the most useful things said today, that it is one thing to say we should all listen to each other, but if we don't recognize also what Mike is saying about what we think about each other, it'll be hard to let that information in, and I think that might be a really good place to end this excellent panel. And thank you all for your participation, and thank you.